welcome to what I hope will be a very interesting and more importantly, informative podcast for you. We're going to call this The Doctors Are In. I'm Reverend Dr. Katie Nix, and I'm the lead pastor here at Grace United Methodist Church. With me this morning is Reverend Dr. Philip Blackwell, who is a retired elder of the Illinois Conference. And if you did not grow up in the Methodist Church, which I did not, that probably means nothing to you. So the part that does matter is that Pastor Phil has spent his ministry and career working with students at University of Chicago, working in big churches, small churches, but more importantly, teaching and telling the story of what does it mean to be Methodist. And so our goal for this first of hopefully 4 podcasts is to be kind of a mini TED Talk. I guess we'll have to call it a mini Katie Talk instead since I'm not TED. But to answer some of the questions that I've heard from people as well as questions I've had, not growing up, born and raised Methodist, and yet finding a home here. So we're going to start at the very beginning with this idea, what the heck does it mean to be a Methodist? Where does that word come from and why is it important? So, why Methodist? Where Methodist? How Methodist? All of those things.
Well, Methodism started out as a derogatory term. So John and Charles Wesley were the founders of a movement trying to renew the Church of England, which had fallen on kind of bad times. And they were Anglicans their whole lives. Their father was an Anglican vicar. Their mother was a great teacher, Susanna. She's also a great producer of children. There were 19 children, though 10 lived, and 3 boys, 7 girls, and John and Charles were brothers, Charles the older one. And so they grew up in this very conventional Church of England household. They went to Oxford University, and John was just terribly focused on doing the right thing.
Now that sounds like something I can get behind as the oldest child here,
Yes.
right? I'm going to do it right.
Yeah.
Like that's my whole story right there. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it right.
Well, what he did was while he was a student at Oxford, he started going over to the prison in town to visit the prisoners.
Let's say, was it on purpose because he was having too much fun at Oxford? But no, it was to visit the prisoners.
No, well,
okay.
And it says, Jesus says, visit the prisoners. So he went and visited the prisoners. But he also got together other students to get together at 5 o'clock in the morning to pray, to do Bible study, to sing hymns, and then also to go over and visit the prisoners.
5 in the morning. I don't know if I love Jesus enough for 5 in the morning.
No, well, certainly the guys living in the rooms around them didn't like Jesus.
Oh, I'm sure they appreciated that.
And so they got called Methodists by the people who did not like them at 5 o'clock in the morning. So being a Methodist was, again, a negative term. A term of making fun of John Wesley and his brother Charles.
So one would almost say in our settings, so Grace United Methodist Church is in St. Louis, Missouri, so it'd be almost like calling someone a Cubs fan who grew up in Chicago rather than, God's beloved Cardinals.
Yeah, let's go on with theology. So they graduate from Oxford, and John becomes a priest in the Anglican Church, and he's assigned to come to Georgia in the colonies.
Oh, bless his heart.
Well,
for anyone who has to go to Georgia.
Oh, it's tough. But he was supposed to be ministering to the native population, but he discovered that the indigenous population was more faithful than the British colonialists. Faithful in the sense of doing the right thing, of taking care of each other when there was hunger, taking care of each other when there was a need. And
how often do you even see that today, that sometimes those who are outside the church, I'm doing air quotes here, those who say, well, we have all the answers, really the ones who show the compassion and mercy are not always the ones inside the building.
No, Jesus talked about the sheep and the goats, and the sheep were surprised that they were doing the right thing, and the goats were disappointed that they weren't included because they were trying so hard to do the right thing. So that was the story that was going on, and John Wesley failed as an evangelist, so he went back to England and defeated, a failure. And then, as he writes in his diary on May 24th, 1738, he goes unwillingly to a Bible study.
And if you've ever had to go unwillingly to a Bible study, you probably know the feeling. Yeah.
And watch out what happens, because he said that at 8:45, while someone was reading Martin Luther's introduction to the book of Romans, he said, I felt my heart strangely warmed.
Now, here's what I love about this story, that he put in his diary 8:45.
Yeah.
Tells me the method of the man here goes all the way to, hold on, it's 8:45. Let's wrap this Bible study up.
Then, again,
He'd be the one in the very back pew of the church watching me going, okay, preacher, let's wrap this up, right?
Yeah, there are people like that, as you know.
Yes.
There are. But people have said about John Wesley that if he'd been a garbage man, England would have been the cleanest country in the world.
There we go.
Because he was watching the clock and
Yeah.
doing everything right. But what he discovered is that he had his theology completely backward.
As I have, been convicted of myself on a time or two, right?
But it's very much current theology in the United States these days. The idea, the wrong idea, the one that Wesley grew up with, is if you do the right things, God will reward you with salvation. So if you go to the right church and you tithe and you
serve on the trustee committee,
and you know the right creeds, and you hang out with the right people,
you get your Jesus T-shirt and you wear it around.
Well,
Yeah,
there you are.
Yeah.
And he did all those things. I mean, he saw that as the sort of the discipline that he and his brothers and others were to do.
And what does it lead him to? Failure, defeat, derogatory names. It wasn't working. Yeah.
So, but when his insight on that night on Aldersgate Street was, no, it starts with God's love, which is not earned. You don't even know you're being loved by God until it begins to dawn in you, my heart strangely warmed. And that you go from being loved by God to beginning to develop faith that allows you to understand your existence is already justified. You don't have to prove to anybody that you're important. You're already important, so get on with it. Now, there are a lot of theologies that get you just to being justified, that you're saved, you're okay.
Think about these things, and if you believe X, Y, and Z and say the special prayer, then you're done.
And it's a done deal, you're in.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a predestination notion among others, the Calvinists and all that once you're in, and if you're not in, you're out. And Wesley said, no. Even it's possible to backslide. You could be in and then you could be out if you mess up your life a lot. So John Wesley changed the focus from doing the right thing theologically and parochially to going out into the world and trying to do what God had called us to do. And so Methodism becomes a renewal movement within the Church of England. It does not become something contrary to the church.
And you know what I really like about this is, one, this idea of it puts all of the work back in God's hands, right? God is reaching out to me first, and God is already making that first step in that first movement, right? And then once I become aware that I am loved and I'm accepted, or in John Wesley's case, I'm not a failure, I'm not a reject, I'm not all these things, that from there, the answer is not, okay, now go write a really nice paper about it, or, the answer is, and so visit the prison and feed the hungry and clothe the naked. And for me, that was the entry point for becoming Methodist, was that I could come in to this setting and say, I didn't grow up, believing X, Y, and Z. And the Methodist Church says that's not the requirement.
No.
Do you love God, and do you want to be part of what God is doing in this place? And that's the Methodist Church, I think.
And John Wesley was very clear about it, and usually Methodists are continually clear about it. There's no special salvation in Methodism. Presbyterian, UCC,
I thought I
Lutheran.
was special.
Oh, well, you are special, but not.
But in a different sense.
God's eyes, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you're not going to be a step ahead of the Presbyterians by being a Methodist. It is a way of characterizing the call of God.
Yes.
And
Now you will be a step ahead because I always make sure service is out in 59 minutes so
Yeah.
we can at least beat the Presbyterians to lunch.
yeah, well, that's
But
important.
beating them to heaven is another story, and
You have to stand in line when you get there, but yeah, the whole notion that well, it's all about grace.
you know, we should name a church after
We
that.
should.
I'm a
No,
fan
but-
of that idea. Yeah.
I mean, of the many definitions of grace, including religious definitions, it includes the notion that God embraces us in God's love, whether we deserve it or not, which is usually no.
No.
But Wesley said, okay, it's not enough just to do the right things. There is a next step because you have to live out that faith to do it. It's not that you're doing it to get in, but you're in, so do it.
Yeah.
And that becomes then a kind of an alternative to either the people who said, well, if you do all the right things, you're going to get into heaven, or you've already been chosen by God to be heaven, so it doesn't matter what you do. And he says, no, God's grace is you've been accepted, and
Yeah.
you got better do the right thing.
And when you pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as we do in every Sunday, it means so go be part and co-create, birth with God, what God's kingdom is going to look like here, where the outcasts are accepted and all are welcomed into the family and community.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that's really the heart of kind of, if you were to say at a base level, what is the Methodist Church? It's this idea of grace, right? That God's love and God is reaching out to you even before you're aware of it. And because of that, we extend that grace to others. And how important it is it's not about signing your name on the document of I believe A, B, C, D. It's about God loves me, therefore I'm going to go and love others and go out and do that. So I think that's the kind of big takeaway for me for this podcast number one is, love God, love others, and it's all about amazing grace. You want to sing about
No, I
amazing
don't want
grace?
to. But I think the next time we talk about, so then what happened after this revelation to John Wesley, because it didn't go well automatically. For 58 years, he tried to make sense out of what he learned that night.
I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'm still trying to make sense out of life. And you're a few years older than me. We'll just leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
Still trying to make sense out of life. And so this idea of God's grace is going to guide us through each step. And then, it wouldn't be a podcast with me if we didn't bring Disney into this. And so there is a line in a movie, and I'm crediting Disney so we don't get in trouble here, but when one can't see the future, all one can do is the next right thing. And I think that's the Methodist Church, right? We don't know what's coming, but we do know that God loves us, and so God says, just do the next right thing.
Okay, so John Wesley was a Disney character?
Well, that's going to be podcast number 2.
Okay.
Which Disney princess is John Wesley? Oh my goodness, we've got it. We hope you've enjoyed episode number 1, and we'll come back with some more insights and Disney quotes and who knows what else. Have a wonderful day and take care.